So I guess welcome to another weekly Fungineering podcast where we never miss a week ever. Yeah. Also, you might get to hear one or more babies in the background because Craig and I have both had kids, I think, since the last episode.
I mean, our wives have, I guess.
That's true. I was mostly uninvolved in the process.
Yeah, it's actually pretty boring having kids as a dad until the kid gets to be like, I don't know, a year old and they're walking around and can really interact well. Then it starts being a lot of fun.
I wouldn't downplay it. You get to turn the kids upside down, though. Throw them up in the air.
Yeah, and throw them. And your wives disapprove of that because they're so risk averse. But dads are there to do dangerous stuff with kids.
I've been getting some good throwing her in the air time. It's really fun.
My advice to you on throwing your kids in the air, both Blake and just our average listener, is do like 40 reps a day of throwing your kid in the air as they get heavier and heavier. Because you don't want to hit a point where suddenly your kid's like 45 pounds and it's really hard to throw them in the air then.
Well, it's also important for planning for the future. So like one of these days, your daughter's probably going to weigh like 120 pounds, right? And you still got to be able to throw her. So this is the easiest way to make sure that you don't have a gap in your training.
Yeah, you future-proofed yourself against the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Blake, is there anything going on in the news?
I don't know. I just heard something about some Indian reservation. So maybe there's other things going on.
I felt like we could have the most epic title for this podcast of any podcast we've ever done. It could be like COVID-19, Tesla, Trump bucks, market meltdown, and the coming depression. Or we could just title it something like, it's just the flu, bro. One or the other. I mean, there's no middle ground. We have to choose one title or the other.
Well, I think most of our podcasts are named really boring. So it would just be like a Fungineering episode. Who knows what number it is? COVID-19.
I think we've been doing this for nearly 3 years, and we do one every week. So it should be just about episode 150.
It should be right around there. We may have missed one or two, though.
Yes.
Trump bucks. I don't know. One of my favorites was we're taking this podcast private, funding secured. So I wish we had something equally appropriate for that. You know, podcast distancing in all caps.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Sit 6 feet away from your computer while you listen to this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Make sure to wash your hands. Don't lick your headphones.
So I guess we kind of teased with Tesla there. But I think what we'll do is if we actually get around to really talking about Tesla in this podcast, then it will be in the title and not just us talking. So at this point, if you've looked at the title and it doesn't include the word Tesla, then sorry, we really didn't get around to it. And we talked about COVID-19 and the doomers versus the flu bros and all the rest of the issues around that.
Nah, let's talk about Tesla. I'm sure you have stuff to say about Tesla. And I know all our listeners are going to be like, yes, thank you, Blake. Thank you for making him talk about Tesla.
I know there's like 15 people right now who are rejoicing. Wow, Craig's going to talk about Tesla compared to like the 10 people who want to hear us talk about COVID-19 or the 5 people who want to hear our advice and thoughts about life as an engineer.
Please note, Craig is heavily inflating these listener numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, so the economy is not doing quite as well. And there's this plague going around. And so everybody has to stay inside and not build cars or go to dealerships and buy luxury cars. So how do you think Tesla's going to do?
Let me preface this with, we are recording this on Sunday evening of March 29th, 2020. So that's pretty important because all this COVID junk is moving pretty fast.
Yeah, that's something I find really interesting is you read an article and then you're like, oh, this is from last week. Screw it. Who cares?
I know. When the first case was confirmed in Washington, like 6 or 8 weeks ago now, I got on Seeking Alpha that night and I was like, every one of these articles that I'm seeing up here on Seeking Alpha is now like completely out of date and useless because now we have a confirmed COVID case in the US. So whatever advice they were offering about the market that was written prior to that is now no longer really that useful.
Mm-hmm.
So things move exceptionally fast with this. In fact, today, the daily coronavirus task force press conference, which is like the president's daily press briefing thing, like he basically said, we're going to keep doing social distancing and those guidelines for another 2 weeks, I think. And all of a sudden, everybody was like, oh my God, it's the Great Depression again. And so it was like, at that moment, everything just turned again in everyone's mind. Yeah. So Tesla, they're still kind of having trouble making a profit just by selling cars. Oh, yeah, I know. It's been hard to follow Tesla for the last year. One, because we had more kids, and my job got more stressful. But two, Tesla's in this boring place where it's just like, yes, they're going to report losses in the first and second quarter of every year because the first quarter is cyclically bad for the car industry, and then they're going to shove all their losses into those quarters, and then they can report profits in the last two quarters. And that looks a lot better to have, like, you know, minus 800 million, minus 800 million, and then plus 400 million, plus 400 million, instead of minus 600 million every quarter consistently.
Wasn't 2019 a profitable year for them?
uh Non-GAAP, it was profitable, but the way that you get to that is things like you count stock-based compensation as a plus on the balance sheet, and there's a lot of fuckery that goes on with things like that to get there. But the core business of building and selling cars is still unprofitable.
Hmm. So how do you think they're going to do now that everyone has to stay inside and the economy's depressed and people don't want to buy luxury cars anymore?
So they were facing this big problem even coming into 2020, which was that the Chinese economy was already hurting. Car sales were down in China, EV sales were down in China, luxury car sales were down in China. And so, their initial single product they were going to be offering in China, which was made in China Model 3s, was kind of getting pressed on all sides by that. But they really had a lot of pluses working for them with respect to that. One, they had to put up virtually no capital to build that factory in China. Chinese banks gave them all the loans for it. And then they were going to be able to essentially make a different product still called the Model 3, a potentially cheaper product. I was never quite convinced by arguments that talked about the cost of labor in China was significantly cheaper and they were going to save a lot of money there, because one thing Tesla also said is they were going to go even further backwards on their automation plans for the assembly line. So they were going to use even more human labor on the Model 3 assembly line in Shanghai than they did in Fremont.
I would still expect them to save money on that, though, because it really is that big of a difference.
Right. On an absolute dollar basis, yes. They would probably save money, but would they save 40% of the labor costs? I doubt it. They may save like a lesser percentage, but I doubt it was going to be a huge thing.
Do you happen to know their cost breakdown? Like where does the cost of the car come from?
I don't think I've ever seen anyone even speculate on that.
Okay. So it might be one of those things where if labor is 10% of it, then even if you can save 40%, that's 4% of your costs. Or it could be 90%. I don't know.
Yeah. They were also going to start using more Chinese suppliers for parts. And then, of course, a lot of the parts for their cars come from Asia. I mean, a significant proportion of them. And so they were going to be geographically closer to those parts. So all the shipping costs would be lower. They also had some favorable tariff deals with the Chinese for building the factory. On the minus side of that is that they've never really sold that many cars in China. And so a lot of people were asking, like, look at their sales numbers. They might sell 20 or 30,000 cars a year in China historically. And suddenly they're building a factory whose initial production capacity is 150,000 Model 3s a year. And they were mostly going to be sold in China, but in other places in the Asian Pacific area also. And so I always thought there was a real good argument that they were just building over capacity. And as the Shanghai factory was being built, they started talking about, hey, we're going to build a European factory now. And so, they've kind of scouted out this place near Berlin. And, they started talking about what will we build there? And of course, they initially say Model 3s. And they throw out some number like 100 or 150,000 per year capacity. And suddenly you add up Fremont and Shanghai and potentially Berlin, and you get to a Model 3 production capacity of 600,000 a year or something. And you start to ask yourself, can a $50,000 car sell 600,000 units per year in a sedan format? And, at one point I went and looked up what's the highest selling car by volume in the world, and it's the Toyota Corolla. And they make them in like 9 factories around the world, and they sell a little over 1 million of them a year. But the average cost is about $21,000. And that curve slopes up pretty high as you start moving to the right on cost, and suddenly, how many units are you going to be able to sell? Well, many fewer. And I had always wondered about that. I've never really seen a good answer, but isn't 600,000 going to be vast over capacity? And they've tried to mitigate that by saying, hey, we'll build the Model 3 on the same platform. At Fremont, we'll utilize some of the same assembly line to build the Model Y. And then they said at Shanghai, the Model Y will be additional capacity on top of the 150,000 Model 3s that we'll build there. And, Blake and I have talked privately about the Model Y before, and I think we're both kind of skeptical on how well that will sell. Now, obviously it's a crossover vehicle, and so it's potentially has a sticker price of a couple $1,000s more, so it'll help revenue, but will they sell enough to significantly impact revenue? And will many Model Ys that are sold not just be lost Model 3 sales?
Yeah, that's what I would expect. I think it will almost 100% cannibalize sales. I don't know. Maybe people feel differently about this, but I don't think there will be a lot of people looking for like a Honda CRV and then the Y exists and they're like, oh, never mind. It'll be people who are looking at a Model 3 and then they're like, oh, but I can get a slightly bigger one.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like the number will be like 75% cannibalized. I feel like there will be some organic growth in demand from the Model Y's mere existence, but because I know there are a lot of people who just prefer to have a crossover instead of a sedan. And so they would never consider a Model 3. But I still think it's going to be high.
Maybe the argument that you'd make if you're in Tesla is it's based on the same platform. You can probably calculate like it'll cost X to retool our lines to be able to make Ys or 3s. And so we will learn what the mix is from consumers. Probably they're speculating about what it is, but they'll learn. And then they can change some lines over to be the right thing. And so they're like, we don't care if it cannibalizes. We just care if our sales kind of go up. And then we'll convert our lines to be the most appropriate mix of cars. In which case it'll help. And it'll help a lot more than the X did, because the X had a lot less part sharing. So I think it did. I don't actually know what the part sharing is, but the same platform thing is convincing.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get a lot of clarity on those issues of demand for a while, because they just started production of the Y in Q1 of 2020. And then COVID-19 happened, and the Shanghai factory was shut down, not just for the normal Chinese New Year, but then after that to help contain the virus. And then demand will extra plummet because of COVID. So we really won't get any clarity. And that's really going to make analysis of Tesla even more difficult going forward. That we have this other factor that's vastly influencing people's behavior. It's not just another Q1 and then another Q2.
Yeah. I mean, we're basically in the year like 0 AC right now, right? Like nothing's ever going to be the same because now we'll have had a modern pandemic and it'll really change the way people look at everything. And I mean, we've talked about like there hasn't really been a crash since 2008. Everyone's like longest bull run of all time. And there's investors who haven't really been investing when there was a crash.
I've made that argument to people several times that, you could have, say you got out of college sometime in like 2006. And for the first couple years you're out of college and you had like a professional job, you probably were investing in your 401k, but you probably weren't very minded about finance and investments and stocks and things like that at the time, not until you got a few years older and you had enough invested that it mattered. And so you could have gotten out in 2006, age 23 or maybe 24 if you had an advanced degree or something. And so potentially you could be 38 years old today and have never known a bear market.
Yeah. This one's going to be pretty bad, I think.
Yeah.
But it also, I'm sort of amused because Craig doesn't really see the comments on the YouTube videos because they're mostly just like asinine and I shield him from those, but I read them. And there's a bunch of people who are going back over our old videos once in a while and they're like, ha ha, looks like your prediction about Tesla is wrong. And it's like, okay, idiots. But one of the things we kept reiterating is all it's going to take is some kind of market downturn, and then they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I feel like this is the prophecy. Like, it's the longest bull market, but like, it's not going to last for 100 years. There's something that'll hit it. And this is obviously the thing. And so there will be people on one side saying, well, it was a black swan. No one could have predicted it. And then there's going to be other people saying, well, black swans that no one predicted happen like every 10 years or something.
Yeah.
So like, it'll be interesting. I think what'll happen is most of the people who left some kind of like shitty comment will just never hear from him again. It's not like they're going to show up and be like, never mind, I was wrong. But it'll be interesting to see. Can Tesla weather this?
Yeah, so they've raised $6 billion of new money in less than the last 12 months. So, when people talk about Tesla going bankrupt, it's like you have to be betting against their ability to raise insane amounts of money. And I bet a lot of people who are investors in Tesla don't realize Tesla's raised $6 billion of money in the last 12 months. And money is cheaper now than it's ever been, right? The Fed has cut the prime rate to zero and said that it's going to backstop individual companies. And and so it's going to be really hard for a giant company like Tesla to go out of business in that kind of environment. But on the other hand, do you really think people are going to keep buying the same number of $48,000 cars at this point? We weren't just at the top of the longest ever bull market. We were at the top of one of the longest auto cycles at the same time. And you go out and you read articles today and you see that GM and Fiat Chrysler and Ford are all now offering 84-month 0% financing if you'll just get your ass to a dealership and buy a car. And so, there's definitely desperation in the auto industry. And please do not post in the comments, oh, but Tesla survived the last bear market in 2008 and 2009. Yeah, all they made back then was roadsters for $200,000 for rich people in hand-built volume. So the fact that they survived that doesn't mean anything.
It's okay. When they post in the comments, I just won't tell you.
Okay, good.
You'll never know.
I get tired of seeing that argument that like they survived the last bear market when they were really an absolutely different company, as if that has any bearing now.
Yeah. Well, also they survived the Great Depression because all the ancestors of them that were alive during the Great Depression, they made it somehow to have kids who went on to found Tesla or grandkids or whatever. And so like they can definitely make it through hard times.
It's the ultimate survivorship bias.
Yeah, pretty much. Nobody has the wrong strategy about anything because obviously they're alive now, right? And so they made it this far.
Their genes got to this point in time.
Yeah, so no one can ever make a wrong decision.
Yeah. So yeah, because of that, I think it's still really hard to bet against Tesla even today. Their cash position is not nearly so good as the headline claims. I mean, there's always been that problem with the reporting. They report cash and cash equivalents, and there's a lot of very well documented games that we've talked about on the podcast before that they play with the cash number, but the actual amount of cash on hand is much less than that. But even then, they probably have about $5 or $6 billion on hand right now, and that can weather things for quite a long time. Now, there is one problem, okay, and maybe 2 years ago, they were on a conference call, and then CFO Deepak Ahua, he made this comment, and it was something to the effect of scaling creates cash flow. And what he was talking about is typically the way the auto industry works is that you get parts from your suppliers, you owe them money in 90 days, and then you build a car, you ship it to a customer, and you collect money upon delivery, either from the customer or from their bank. And so as you scale up and you're accelerating the number of cars you're building in any time period, you're essentially not paying your supplier, but then you're delivering the car and you're getting cash before you have to pay the supplier. And so as long as your production is increasing or level, you've created this huge cash flow engine. And he's correct. I mean, it does work that way. But the flip side of that is that when you start selling fewer and fewer cars, that engine runs in reverse and it sucks your cash flow down because now you have to pay for the cars you've built in the past and you're not building new cars and selling them as fast to have new cash coming in from the customers. And so potentially there's problems there because they've got what we would consider high accounts payable, but maybe it's not too high for an auto industry manufacturer, right? Because when you're building thousands of cars a week, then obviously you're going to owe a lot of money to suppliers. So there are issues like that that could turn around and bite them eventually. But like I said, even now it's very hard to find a bet against Tesla that I'm willing to take because money is so cheap and the Fed is basically running the printing press as fast as they can to try and not let the market and the economy and consumer confidence fall too much.
Yeah, but even once it comes back, how many people want to buy these luxury EVs?
Yeah, that's going to purely be a function of how long the COVID thing goes on and how much economic damage is done. And then, what can people and the government creatively come up with to try to get the economy moving again? We like to speculate a lot on the Functioneering podcast, but even that may be too speculative for us.
Yeah. Also, as a bonus, Russia and Saudi Arabia are having a battle to see who can lower the price of oil more.
Yeah, I think both of them are already below the point where they can actually balance their budgets of their national economies by doing that. I mean, there's a dollar value for West Texas Intermediate and Brent crude where Saudi Arabia and Russia can pump it out of the ground and make at least a penny of profit. But there's a higher number, which the price of a barrel of oil has to be for them to run their economy effectively. Because both of those countries are highly dependent on oil sales. So it'll be interesting to see how long they can play that game. And I don't know, I'm not even convinced at how effective that game's going to be. I mean, I know that Saudi Arabia and Russia are not very friendly with each other, and neither of them is really that friendly with us. But if their goal is to put a bunch of marginal shale producers in the US out of business, well, okay, they'll go out of business. And then the super majors like Exxon and Chevron and ConocoPhillips will go and buy up the leases. And eventually, when the price of oil comes back, whether it be a year or 10 years from now, they'll just uncap the wells and start pumping again. So, it's not like, let's say that Saudi Arabia and Russia wanted to, they wanted to have a price war, but also they had a secondary objective of destroying Venezuela's oil industry. Okay. So you have like a nationalized oil industry in Venezuela. Yeah, you can destroy that because it'll just stop pumping and the government will send the people home and the machinery will atrophy. And you don't have the same type of buying up of assets out of bankruptcy the way you do with the oil industry in America. So I'm not convinced that the long term effect is going to be as dire. Short term, it's bad for those companies in the US, but again, bankruptcy is the natural cycle. It's the purging fire in the forest, so to speak. You get rid of the inefficient companies and you reallocate the capital to the efficient ones that survived.
One thing it would change, though, is it'll hurt drilling and exploration companies. Whenever oil is really cheap, people stop looking for it. And then once it gets more expensive, they try to spin that capacity up, but it takes time. It takes a long time.
Yeah, so you have a huge lag in exploration and new drilling behind the price of a barrel of oil increasing. Yeah.
Yeah. So arguably, if you were Saudi Arabia and Russia and you could collude, which they're not, that's kind of their core problem, then what you'd want to do is flood the market in cycles. You'd want to try and figure out what's a cycle that's just long enough that the industry can't really wait it out. And then you just flood the market, you'd make oil cheap, people would stop exploring, and then you would tighten it back up, and then it'd get really expensive. And you'd probably make back the money you lost on flooding the market. And you could just keep doing that. Because most businesses don't have a time horizon that's long enough where they can figure out a way to adapt to that.
Yeah, and you would hope to get those exploration companies to start investing heavily and then just crash the price down again. That's a good idea.
Thanks.
Maybe you should see if Bin Salman has an opening for an oil minister.
Yeah, maybe I could go work for him. Bin Salman, if you're listening, On a side note, we still haven't found someone from North Korea who wants to come on as a guest to the podcast, despite Craig's offer a while ago. But maybe.
I had forgotten about that one, but I know there are defectors who already live in South Korea and some in America.
Mm-hmm. And they all listen to Fungineering.
Well, I mean, they all basically spend their time like going around talking about how bad North Korea is, and giving discussions and things like that. But we want someone who's currently in North Korea.
I would suspect that, I mean, not that there's necessarily anything weird going on, but I would suspect those people are basically like state sponsored. I think South Korea has a lot of reason to want people to talk negatively about North Korea. And I don't think that the North Korean defectors are giant liars or anything. It sounds, every source I've been able to find indicates that North Korea is not the best country in the world. But I think South Korea is like, oh yeah, we'll definitely finance you going around and giving talks.
So yeah, what comes up for Tesla in the next 6 months? It's hard to say. The Fremont factory right now is at reduced production.
Although, is that a positive? If they make fewer cars that they'll sell at a loss, does it help?
Those fixed costs for the production lines are so huge that it would almost just be better to shut it down, I guess. I don't know. It's and they were struggling so bad with S and X production for the last basically 5 quarters that it's plummeted so bad since first quarter of 2019 that line, there's no way that line is profitable. It's running at something like half of its design rate. And the number that people in the industry always put out is you have to run an automotive production line at over 80% to break even.
Yeah, they're not going to be doing that for what, probably 6 to 10 weeks from now.
Yeah, and what demand will they see in China right now to go buy the cars? Now, on the plus side, the countries that report new registrations daily, I think it's Norway, Spain, and somebody else, I can't remember who. They're still delivering cars even during social distancing and lockdowns and quarantines and everything. Like, cars are still getting delivered to end customers and registered. So even in Spain, where apparently COVID-19 is really bad right now.
Yeah, I wonder what's going on there. And then people are going to just park that car in their driveway and leave it there, I guess.
Yeah.
Because they're not going anywhere.
Now, this could be effective people who have bought the car before this thing spun out of control. And so now they're just kind of like, well, yeah, I bought this car. I committed to buy it in, December. And now here it is. So it could be that. And it could be that going forward, it's going to be a whole different picture. I guess when we get the Q1 2020 financial numbers from Tesla sometime around, I guess late April, we'll probably get them. The deposits line item will be really interesting to see how much money in deposits they have compared to previous quarters. But even that game has gotten harder and harder because Tesla will do these things where they're like, well, you can reserve a Model 3. I think it was $5,000 or was it $1,000 to reserve a Model 3? I forget which one. And they famously had like 450,000 reservations. It was $1,000 each.
That sounds right.
And then they were like, well, the Model Y, it's going to be like $100 to reserve it or something, It was some paltry amount. And then they never announced what the number of Model Y reservations was, which of course led to two competing theories. One was they're trying to not Osborne their own car by playing it up too much. And the other theory was, well, they just didn't get many reservations because it's a dud of a car.
I thought that was the Cybertruck.
No. The Cybertruck was like $100 deposit too.
Okay. It was also like non-binding, right? It just reserved your place in line. It wasn't really a deposit.
Yeah, I think they've all been that way though. They've all been refundable.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's not until you actually configure the car that it becomes non-refundable. Because then it goes into the production queue for the factory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's almost like it's harder to see now what might happen to Tesla than it was before, because the number of potential things increased with COVID-19. It's like, will governments infinitely backstop Tesla just to keep it going just to keep a car manufacturer going. I mean, if Ford goes bankrupt and GM goes bankrupt again, then can Tesla be like, hey, we'll go ahead and jump in also while we're at it and, go bankrupt and then get refunded by the government and stood back up as a new company?
Well, I will go ahead and say if they go bankrupt, you still win the prediction contest.
I know, but the thing about that, it's just like the Doomers versus the Flu Bros. It's like no matter what, both sides will claim victory. So if Tesla goes bankrupt during COVID-19, everybody will be like, "Well, it was a great company. There was nothing wrong," and then COVID came along. And then, of course, I would be like, "Man, their balance sheet has been a nightmare forever, and COVID was just the one bad event that was needed for the whole thing to fall apart." And we'll all claim victory.
Yeah, because each crash theoretically has been like this one-off event, right? We didn't have two .com crashes, we didn't have two housing crashes, and now we're not going to have two COVID crashes. Although 1918 did a lot of damage too. Yeah, you can always just claim they're one-offs, except that one-offs just occur all the time on a long enough time scale. So I think this makes Tesla a lot likelier to go bankrupt. I think most of the things that have changed because of COVID hurt them. Money being cheap helps, and that is hugely important. It might be the single most important thing, but I think people are going to have a lot less appetite for an expensive car. I think that it's going to hurt their production a huge amount. It's going to hurt their ability to just operate as a business because everyone's having to work remote. That's really bad. People who have to assemble the cars actually can't do it.
Yeah, all the risk from the suppliers. I mean, Elon himself famously said several years ago that if we're missing one part, we can't deliver the car.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to be happening a lot. There are a lot of problems with especially international shipping right now, in particular shipping from China, where I'm betting a lot of their parts come from. And so all these things are going to hurt. They're going to hurt a lot. They're going to hurt in ways I bet they're unprepared to deal with them because Elon seems to sort of have that mentality of like, we're just going to keep taking on risk and stack all the risk. But then if everything goes well, it goes so well that it's worth it. And this is kind of a weird tail risk. And it has a bunch of like little tail risks. It hurts your suppliers. It hurts your amount of customers coming in. It'll probably hurt your mix of cars. People who want to buy cheaper versions of their cars if they do, just things like that. And it's just going to be a whole bunch of things at once. And they don't strike me as having a culture being super prepared for disasters. So I think this increases their likelihood to go bankrupt a lot.
But money is really cheap right now.
And if you can just borrow infinite money, you will never go bankrupt, right?
Yeah, it's that easy. Back in, I think it was January, they raised some money. And of course, Elon and Zach Kirkhorn, their current CFO, before, during, and after every capital raise, they say that they don't want more money, they don't need more money, and it would be stupid to raise more money. And then they raise more money again. And so when they did all those things in January of 2020, they raised a paltry $2 billion by issuing new stock. And this is in the time period when their stock had flown up to like over $900 a share. And it was like, if it's $900 a share, they should raise $15 billion, not $2 billion. They should dilute the fuck out of the shareholders because the shareholders don't care. I mean, the people who are holding shares of Tesla right now, they think that this is, a sea change in the way that business and technology works, and that it does not matter how much they get diluted. They already get diluted 1% per quarter just from stock-based compensation. And they don't care. The whole stock market doesn't care about it. And so, when the stock price is $900, man, I feel like the board had a duty to just issue as much stock as the underwriters would have given them. Just go to the underwriters and say, if you can give me $100 billion, I will take it. And let them put the limit on it. But instead, they only took $2 billion, and then they went through the normal song and dance afterwards of, yeah, we didn't need this money and we don't want it, and we won't do it again, and it was stupid. And now it's looking like, hey, if your company had another $10 billion of fresh cash sitting around, things would look a lot better. Even I would not be recording this podcast right now if Tesla had 10 billion more than they have on hand. Because even I would think, well, of course they're going to survive COVID.
I don't know. How are they going to flip the switch to profitable? How are they going to do that?
They could worry about that after COVID. But what an extra $10 billion would have bought them is pay off all their accounts payable, put everything into a hibernation mode if they thought that was the best way to get through the rest of this, and then just basically sit there doing next to nothing, only paying the most key people to stay around, and then wait it out.
And then try to rehire everybody and rebuild the company almost from scratch. That's like how NASA is never going to have a manned space program ever again, really. Because after Shuttle disbanded, everyone left. Like, I don't know. I guess those people probably would stay in the automotive industry. So maybe you can rehire them, but still. Maybe Tesla's going to try and set a record and be like sort of on average unprofitable for longer than any other company in the history of the world. They'll be like on their 25th year of we still actually haven't seen a return yet, but people keep investing. And I don't know, because at some point they have to turn a profit. Otherwise, it's just some kind of weird charity.
Do they, though? I actually saw an article on Seeking Alpha a year or two ago where a guy was like, no, they don't.
Well, how would you have a company that lasts for like 100 years and never turns a profit?
It's a story company. It's the belief that you're saving the world and that Elon is worthy of it.
What's the longest anyone's ever gone? They didn't break even.
On a publicly traded company?
Yeah, you're restricted to publicly traded here, I guess.
I don't know.
Because if it's not publicly traded, I could see it being something like a company that was nationally owned. There's probably a bunch of nationalized things that have like never seen a profit, never will, and they're just going to last as long as that current government stays in power.
There are a ton in America where basically wealthy people who want to own machine guns start a fake gun business, get the licensing so they can buy and build machine guns, and then just operate at a loss every year. But you have to be in the business in order to do that. And so they're just kind of like fake companies that aren't really interested in ever being profitable. They're just there for the owner to enjoy having machine guns to shoot into the dirt.
Oh, okay. Except now they can shoot them into the dirt on YouTube, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
It enriches us all.
So yeah, you can't have companies that just exist forever with no profit.
Okay, maybe Tesla will be one of those.
But you have to assume that the cost of capital will remain near zero forever. Because if interest rates ever went back up to 3 or 5 or gasp 7%, then that would be over. And I mean, your parents, I'm sure your parents have told you stories the same as mine have that, like, oh, in 1975, we bought our first house and interest rate was 13%. You know, and today I've got a mortgage that's 4% and I'm looking to refi it to like 2.5.
Yeah. Although housing is a pretty bad investment. I think that wasn't as well known then.
I don't know. I don't know enough about that period or the reasons why interest rates were like that or anything.
Maybe some old Fungineering listeners can chime in and tell us the way things used to be back in their day. If so, leave a comment. Also tell Craig that he sucks. So, moving on from Tesla ever so slightly, what do you think is going to happen with COVID? What do you think about it? Best disease ever?
I don't know. 2 weeks ago now at work, they were like, hey, everybody, if you can work from home, work from home. If you're still here, let us know. Because there's a bunch of people where I work who just cannot do their job from home, period. And so I was one of those. And then last week, Tuesday morning, I get into the office and there's an email that basically says the county is shutting us down. Like, we're getting an order from the whole county to shelter in place, or I guess there's different levels that different places are using. They're like stay at home, and some of them are like shelter in place, which means trying not to even come out for food, I guess. I don't know. And so basically I got shut out of work on Tuesday from a job that cannot be done from home. And the company's like, well, we're going to find you something else to do, but the bureaucracy is taking a while to do it. So for now, I'm getting paid to just sit at home.
Well, that's cool.
I also, it's this weird part of my career where I feel like I'm being the worst employee I've ever been. Because I recently had this thing where I changed programs at work and it kind of got bumbled around and there was some miscommunication. And so it created a lot of stress and hassle for a lot of people. And then we just kind of recovered from that. And now there's this, and I'm just sitting at home now collecting a paycheck and doing nothing until the company can figure out a way to have me work from home. So that's what I'm doing right now. Where is this going? It looks like we're going to have at least a couple more weeks of this, like 2 to 4 more weeks like this. I don't see this changing for the better in the next 2 weeks. I could see we get to mid April and maybe we start to see things improving. But I think America is going to have this special kind of problem with COVID where we're just kind of like, fuck you, I'm going outside. And so we go outside and we go to the beach and we go to a park. And then we also say, well, I run a small business and I'm around the same 3 people every day. I'm not staying home. I have to go to work. And so you go to work. And so I don't think we're nearly so compliant as like South Korea and Chinese citizens were, where they'll just accept like a family member getting plucked out of their household and sent to a government run quarantine.
Yeah. Well, also, I don't think the US has as much stomach for setting those kind of policies. Like, we're not that totalitarian, which actually kind of works against us for this one case. So that's kind of a problem. Because right now, when we're recording this on the 29th, the US is basically the worst country in the world to be in terms of COVID. Like, we have the most cases. We still have a very high growth rate of new reported cases. Nothing seems to be mitigating that. I wouldn't be surprised if the US ends up having the single highest death toll of any country from it. However, the US is the third most populous country. So, like, only the top 5 or so countries are the ones that are likeliest to have the highest death total. But it's probably not going to be China. It might be India, and India will underreport or undertest or lie, or later it'll come out that the death toll is the highest. But right now, the US is doing really, really badly.
Yeah, I'm not impressed by the numbers of cases because if you test more, you're going to have more cases. But the death toll will be the telling thing because you kind of can't fake that.
Well, so also, I'm sure you've seen a lot of things about let's flatten the curve. You've probably seen that image. A lot of people have seen the image. And in general, the image shows it's like, let's say the healthcare capacity bar is like 1 inch above the x-axis, and then the hump goes up to like 2 or 3x that. And then they're like, let's flatten it. And then it's exactly under the bar. But really, more practically, what we're going to see is that first hump, where it's like the do nothing one, is going to be like 20 to 40 times higher than the healthcare capacity. It's going to be immensely higher. And so basically, almost everyone who would need critical care is just going to die. And that's if you do nothing. But we're doing something. And so the flattened curve is still, I think, just going to exceed the healthcare curve by a huge amount, like some high multiple. And so a huge number of people are going to die kind of unnecessarily just because the US didn't take appropriately strong measures fast enough. Like, people weren't doing it. Counties, states, and the federal government, like at every level, the response has been not enough and not fast enough. And so it's going to be really, really bad. It's already been pretty bad. And yeah, a number of cases, it is sort of related to testing, but also we can expect that it's going to grow in a similar way to how it's grown in other countries that have implemented similar measures. And so it's growing pretty fast. It's really bad. It's growing exponentially. And I think another problem that we probably have is in the US, lots and lots of politicians are elected, and they would rather let 1 million people die than risk losing re-election. And so they're like, don't panic. I don't know why there's so much emphasis on don't panic. Like, now is actually a really good time to panic.
If there ever was one, this is it.
Yeah. It'd be like, imminent meteor impact, alien invasion, nuclear war, global pandemic. And we have global pandemic. That's actually the thing that's going on. It's not like a joke. And so it's like, yeah, this is kind of a good panic time. I mean, don't do bad things with your panic, but it's like, yeah, if you were going to panic now, this is pretty appropriate. And they're all like, no, don't panic. And remember your feeling of calm when you go to the polling booth in November. But what's going to end up having to happen is it's going to be like, remember your calm, also ignore the pile of bodies over there. Just step over them on your way to the polling booth. And don't blame me for it somehow. Blame my opponent. Like one of the things I expect is this is definitely going to hurt Trump's chances of re-election. We are seeing it in the prediction market. but definitely some mishandling of this is attributable directly to him, because he's like in charge of saying US at a federal level, do this or don't do this, or do it now or do it later.
Be prepared for this scenario or that one because we have limited resources. So you have to pick.
Yeah. And he's done, I mean, I'm not taking like political sides here or anything, but he's done a ton of dumb shit. So, and not to say that another president would have necessarily nailed it or anything, but he's done a bunch of really dumb shit. And so that's going to really hurt. Every time he makes a dumb decision, it kills like 1,000 people or something. But whatever, they're not him. So why should he care? So, yeah, another thing I don't really see people talk about as much is healthcare staff are going to get sick and sometimes they'll die. And so when people are like, oh, flatten the curve, here's our healthcare capacity, like what happens when all those people are in the middle of the peak and they start getting sick? I think the capacity will actually go down.
Yeah, that capacity curve starts to slope downwards. Also, that flattened curve is not just going to be a nice flattened curve with a single peak. At some point, they're going to say, hey, if you're 20 to 40 years old, you can go back to work as long as, you keep washing your hands and you keep not coughing into each other's eyes and stuff like that. And that curve will start to come back up again when that happens. And it'll be a matter of saying, how much increase are we okay with? And so at some point, you have to start walking these restrictions back and doing it incrementally. And, some of those decisions are going to turn out in retrospect to have been bad.
Well, I think your solution there is testing and contact tracing. So we can expect, little tiny outbreaks in the future, but everybody will know. Like, everybody will know.
Also, I could see getting to a point in, say, 2 or 3 months from now where the antibody testing is better and faster and cheaper. And you can just say, hey, look, employer, I've had COVID and I recovered. I can come back to work.
Yeah. I was actually joking to my wife about this, and I was like, what we need to do is make shirts that say, like, I had COVID-19 and all I got was this lousy shirt. And then you just tell everybody, hey, just wear this like every day after you've had it. And that way, these people are very unlikely to infect you and they're not at risk for infection. But there's not that many of those people, and hopefully there won't be that many. So it probably wouldn't matter very much. But yeah, what I think will happen is it'll pop up once in a while, but everybody will know. They'll be like, yeah, this is the thing to be afraid of. It's much more worrisome than flu. And so as soon as someone thinks they might have it, they'll go in and get a test, or they'll have a better test option available. And then they'll tell everyone, or someone will tell everyone, or whatever. The government will mandate it. I don't know. And then it'll be like, who's everyone that had contact with this person? And then you watch all those people really closely.
Yeah, they said today that they have a new test that the FDA approved today that was the result takes 5 minutes.
How does that work? That's really cool.
Yeah. So now the downside is right now the capacity to produce that test is only 50,000 per day. So that'll need to be ramped up like 2 orders of magnitude. But eventually that's where we'll get, is that the testing will be so cheap and easy that, yeah, you can see these new outbreaks nearly in real time. Also, that was something really interesting. I've been watching the daily presidential briefings with his people, and one of the doctors on there earlier this week was talking about how when they're monitoring HIV and AIDS in Africa, they have all this data down to the specific hospital that a patient is at. And so they're rolling that out here. And then one of these pork stimulus bills that they passed in response to this had some language in it that the private labs even had to report all of their COVID information to the government. So they're going to have all of that type of stuff to watch in real time, like where new cases popping up, what are the rates in particular small areas down to things like county level and city level and stuff like that. So I think a lot of that kind of data reporting will get a lot better. And then eventually we might start to see things like, hey, 230 out of 250 counties in Texas still have no cases. Maybe we should do something different besides panic.
Yeah. Also, that's going to lead to privacy conscious individuals not wanting to get tested and just go around and spread it because they won't want to be tracked at that level.
I feel like that's such a minority compared to the flu bros who are already like, it's just the flu. I can just go around and cough in your face and it's okay.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask, what's a flu bro and a doomer?
The doomers are the people who think that we're going to have like 2 million deaths in the US or something. And actually, I guess like 2 million might be reasonable. I don't know if I'm a doomer now by thinking that, but they think it's going to be really high, just really, really high. And then the flu bros are the caricature of the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like, yeah, well, you know, 50,000 people a year die of the flu, and nobody gets upset about that or shuts down the country. And so it's basically just caricatures of the two sides because most of the time humans like to gravitate to those extremes. Most people do not like to be rational and say, hey, I'm in the middle of this, or I'm somewhere not even in the middle. I'm just somewhere not at the two opposites. And like, I can rationally digest all the information I hear and not just fall completely to one side.
Yeah. So I would say at the start of this, I was farther on the other end than even like flu bro, where like I would always see these lists of like potential disasters and like global pandemic would be on there. And I was like, I mean, is that really going to happen? And somehow I ignored like the 1918 flu. I just never thought about it ever. Like I was more concerned about like a meteor impact than a pandemic, which is dumb in retrospect. But hey, I had my bias around that. And then when this started happening, I was very directly affected at work. I was working with a bunch of Chinese engineers and they were all on vacation. And then suddenly they're all on vacation for another federally mandated week. And I was like, well, that's weird. And like they weren't allowed to travel home and they couldn't get to their offices where they had VPNs that they could use to actually like do their work. And so they just couldn't work. And it was like, well, that's significant. And I was looking at the statistics and I was like, oh yeah, this is exponential growth. It's just going to keep doubling. I was like, this is going to be really bad. It's going to affect the whole world. And then I like went home and then played video games and didn't think about it. And so I really had that level of cognitive dissonance where I was just like, yeah, this is going to be super bad. It's probably going to kill millions of people. And then I was like, now it's time to play video games. And like, it was just a huge blind spot. I'll probably never do it again with this particular issue, but it makes me wonder what other issues could I do this with? But I just didn't do anything. And probably I should have come home and sold a bunch of stocks, but nope. And then people would be like, oh yeah, how about this coronavirus thing? And I was like, yeah, I mean, how bad is it compared to the flu? And they're like, oh, it's like 10 times as bad. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, when the flu happens 10 times in a row, like for 10 years running, nobody cares. So is that important? And so I was still kind of doing that for like a month. And then eventually I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is really important because everyone's going to start shutting everything down. And then I started looking at like, well, how bad is it going to be? And it's like, yeah, it's probably going to kill millions of people. I think it's going to be in the low millions globally. And so it's really pretty spectacularly bad. But I was really downplaying it in my mind and to other people for quite a while. It took me a while to really recognize like the true risk and the true importance. I don't know. It feels kind of weird. I was so relatively wrong.
I think my position on the spectrum has shifted both directions depending on which part of the subject. Because earlier on, I thought, oh, everyone will get this eventually. And then, like, I read more and more about how diseases progress and things like that. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, so not everyone is going to get it. Like, herd immunity is a thing that'll happen at some point. And, there will be a vaccine at some point, and like, you know, we'll have better testing and everything, and eventually we'll figure out what we're doing here. So no, it's not guaranteed that everyone's going to get it like I thought earlier on. But then like the number of people that I think are going to die ultimately has probably gone up in my mind.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be really high. So also, I watched a nice YouTube video. It was actually by Salman Khan of the Khan Academy, and he was talking about how to think about like infection rate and death rate and things like that. And he was like, "Hey, let's make some basic assumptions. Like it doubles every 5 days, which is actually way nicer to the virus than how bad it's been. It's like 1.4 days in Italy or something like that. But he's like, let's say it doubles every 5 days. Let's say that it has a 1% death rate. It's probably not. It's probably worse than that, and it's definitely going to get worse as healthcare gets overwhelmed. And it takes someone about 20 days from onset of an infection to actually die. So he's like, so you work out this math. And so at the moment that somebody dies, Like you get first reported corona death in the US or whatever. And you're like, oh, it took a long time to finally kill someone. That's not that bad.
Yeah, except you're already weeks behind, right?
You've doubled 4 times, and it takes about 100 infections to generate one death. So that means at the point that somebody's died, you probably have about 1,600 infected people that represents, because you doubled these 4 times, so you're at 16x, and it took 100 sick people in the first place to get there. So 16 times 100. So that tells you that things are, they're always about to be much worse than they already are, basically. And so you're like, oh, it's only infected a few hundred people. Oh, there's only been a couple of hundred deaths or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but like in a month, it's going to be way worse than that. Also, then in a month, if nobody does anything, the next month's going to be even worse. And so it's really hard to think about. That's why you have to be like, oh, this news is a week old. Who cares about it anymore? But I don't think many people then turn around and say, well, that means the news I'm reading right now is kind of irrelevant for 5 days from now. It's going to be even worse in 5 days. And it's hard to reason about that.
At the daily briefing, I think 2 days ago, they said that now that we've compelled GM to start making ventilators, and we have all the traditional ventilator companies working too and trying to increase their capacity, we were now going to be able to make 100,000 ventilators a month. And it's like, okay, well, you go look at the number of known active cases today, and then you start doing that math on, in a month, how many will there be? How many of those will become critical enough to need a ventilator? And it's probably still going to not be nearly enough ventilators.
Well, so where do you put 100,000 ventilators? In tents?
Yeah, they're doing things like taking convention centers and sporting arenas and building them into hospitals.
Yeah, I guess that works. Okay. Yeah, and probably you don't need your sporting arena for anything else during that time.
Yeah, and all the patients in there already have COVID.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
If you can somehow magically keep the healthcare workers in the place from contracting it, then that's the real key.
Yeah. I don't know how hard it is to deal with these different things, but it feels like there really needs to be a system to like deputize people and teach them not how to be a nurse completely, but like just mechanically, like, oh, here's 5 procedures I'm certified on. Like I can intubate, I can set up a ventilator or something like that. And it's like, are you allowed to inject someone with saline? It's like, nope, I'm not cleared to do that, but I'm cleared to do these handful of procedures. And then you could have people who aren't medical professionals, but they can help with the thing that you have to do a million times. And there's just not enough manpower.
Yeah, I know the president signed an executive order earlier this week, basically notifying all of the ready reserve military people that they could be called up. And of course, everybody's like, "Oh my God, COVID's all through the military, and they're not telling us." And it's like, not well, yeah, it probably is, but it's not that big of a deal because the military tends to be young, healthy people. But
It's still a pretty big deal.
we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Doomer. The bigger thing of the executive order to get the ready reserve to the condition where, individuals can be called up. And the ready reserve are these people who, as I understand it, they've been out of the military. They've also finished any reserve requirement they have. But then you go into this like dormant status called ready reserve. And basically, it can be a number of years where the military can still call you back. But you have no ongoing obligation to continue training or anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And really the reason the executive order was signed to activate them was there were a lot of medical people who have appropriate training to do things. And now this gives the bureaucracy the official way to actually bring them back on board. And so they said that a lot of them have been basically saying, hey, I know how to do these things. I know how to intubate. I know how to do these basic procedures. Or, in some cases, they're much better trained. But now they're doing a whole different job in civilian life. But now they can be brought back on board because of that. And so it's kind of a basic step towards what you were talking about. But what you're talking about reminds me more of some kind of like Soviet conscription. They're like, here's the rifle, and the second man gets the ammo, which really is probably a good idea because you have tons of smart people who are sitting around doing nothing today.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually thought about this. I was like, I would go volunteer to help with this at a hospital or something, and definitely during the worst time if I thought it would help, but they wouldn't let me do anything. And it doesn't, like, all you need is people who are like average intelligence, willing to follow instructions. They've recognized the stakes, and they could do it. You could just trust any, you could grab any random person off the street and be like, I'm going to drill intubating with you like a lot for 3 days or something. You're going to intubate 100 like test dummies, and then you're going to do, I don't, can you do it to yourself? Can you do it to another person who's conscious? But you do a bunch of tests, and then it's like, okay, now you're going to do it for real with, you're going to watch someone do it for real. Then you're going to do it while they watch you. And then finally we'll let you do it on your own. And that would help. It would probably help a lot. But also, maybe some healthcare professional could comment. Maybe they'll be like, well, actually, it's the person coming in checking every hour and then adjusting stuff that is important. And knowing what to adjust is something that you can't teach someone in a week. And so maybe I'm like way off base here, and this wouldn't help at all. I don't know. Maybe we could get more people who put a washcloth in a bucket and then they wring the water out and then they put it on the person's forehead like they do in movies. And that's how you treat like all illnesses.
Yes, you pat the forehead gently with the washcloth too.
I hate those scenes because that's just like, it's like, how people are at the side of the road with the hood popped on their car. And then you're like, I wonder, do you think their car is working perfectly? It's like, and like they look in there and they're like, I don't know what any of this stuff is. I've never seen this in my life. But it signals that the car is having trouble. And I feel like that's what the washcloth is. It's like, I'm giving medical care, but not really, because nobody has burning forehead. And if only you washcloth it, then they're protected. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if deputizing people could help, but definitely pulling in those military people could help. Which also you wanted to get back to. So yeah, having COVID rip through the military, it's pretty bad. So let's say that you're like, flu bro, it's just as bad as the flu. How bad is it to have your entire military get the flu at once? That's pretty bad. Like, that's real fucking bad.
They won't all get it at once.
I know, but it'll rip through them like a wave, an exponentially expanding wave.
Yeah, but they will trend towards being younger and healthier. And so that's going to mitigate a lot.
I know. So you're still going to have some of those young people die. You're going to have some of them require costly medical care. And then also, you're going to have a bunch of older people who are experts, like generals and admirals and stuff. And they're at way higher risk for dying. And so then you're going to lose some of those people. It's also, I would say it would affect your operations, except it's going to affect every military in the world. So like, you might think, oh, well, the US's military is weakened. That's when Canada can finally invade. But, Canada is going to have the same problem, too. So they're going to be down at the same time. It's probably not that big a deal.
But if nothing else, the military should not be in as bad of a position from it as the average of the rest of the US.
I don't know, because the military is stuck in a lot of ways where they don't have a way to isolate everybody. Like, one of their assumptions is that lots of people can be in close quarters just kind of indefinitely, and it's not really a problem. And they've designed facilities around that idea. Like, they have, well, to give a trivial example, aircraft carriers are a really good example of that. What happens when someone gets COVID on an aircraft carrier and it's undiagnosed for a little while? Like, what do you think happens?
Yeah, it was reported last week that 2 aircraft carriers already have cases of it.
And so then what do? Also, how are you going to scale up your medical facilities? You're an aircraft carrier. You don't have a sporting arena that you can go set up extra ventilators in. Do you stop operations? You come back?
Yeah, you fly all the planes off and you use the hangar deck.
Sure, I guess you could do that. But also then, and you fly ventilators on.
You don't have the equipment though.
And you fly staff on, or like you might as well just bring the carrier back to port. So actually it has a lot in common with like zombie movies, really. I feel like the zombie movies are trying to train us all this time. What happens when you let the zombie onto like your submarine and you don't know for a while? It's pretty bad with subs. Although I can imagine them just really aggressively screening. Like, I was talking to someone else about this and I was like, well, what you can do is just require submarine crew to sit in a room for like 2 weeks before they go. And you just make sure, and like that cost is worth it, especially if it's a nuclear submarine, because it's like part of the deterrent strategy. So whatever. But I wonder about all of them. But the Navy's going to have a lot of trouble with this with vessels. You let one person on and it's a huge problem.
Yeah, I would suspect that the subs that are out on patrol right now will just extend their patrol to whatever the maximum limit is.
Yeah, I guess I guess so. I would worry about too many of them coming back at the same time, but they would still come back at different intervals.
Yeah, they would still be staggered, but they would all stay out as long as they could just to buy time to do things like figure out what drugs might work or maybe get a vaccine depending on how long they can extend their patrol, or maybe just have all the isolation have an effect. Except it looks like in America we're too ornery to let the isolation happen.
Mm-hmm. Too proud to stop licking my neighbor's hands.
How else you gonna greet your neighbor?
Ain't no government gonna tell me to stop. But yeah, I feel like the military they have some problems there, and I don't know. Maybe they'll be able to deal with them, but I wonder.
Yeah, the thing, going back to talking about me going kind of back and forth in different parts of the issue between Doomer and Flubro. One of the things that I didn't realize until like 2 weeks ago was that even for people in my age range, the hospitalization rate is still like 20%, even though the death rate is 1 in 500.
Yeah. So if hospital care is saturated and you couldn't get a bed, how well do you think you would do if you're in the 20%?
Right. And what happens to your death rate then because your hospitalization is not possible?
It goes up a lot.
Yeah, that makes it a lot worse for me because the data I saw were 25 to 40 years old is how they had that group chopped up. And so I'm at the top end of that, which means my rate should be even higher than 20%. 20% is the average for the whole group.
Yeah. And the military has a lot of people who are older than 25.
Yeah.
And also most of the world. So, yeah. And so then another question I would pose is, what will people who are turned away from care do? Like, some of them will go home and wait to die, I guess, by themselves. But a lot of them would probably be like, I'm going to have friends or neighbors or family take care of me, possibly spreading it more. Because one of the things that stops it from spreading is once you get the symptoms, you like stop going out and licking everyone's hands like you normally would. But then people will be like, well, I need to help this person who would have needed to be hospitalized, but now they're just in their bed, like, I don't know, wheezing. Do you end up wheezing from it? I don't actually know. And so that'll be really bad. Like, it might be that once care gets saturated, then the infection rate kind of goes up because people are trying to deal with it in its amateur hour.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, 4 or 5 years ago now when the last big Ebola outbreak happened in Africa. Part of the issue was that in some of the cultures in Africa, there's a strong tradition of physically embracing the dead body of your loved one after they've died, which, of course, is an awesome way to transmit Ebola.
Yeah. So that leads into one of my predictions, which is I think Africa is just going to get absolutely smashed by COVID. And I haven't seen a lot of numbers for African countries, but I know a lot of African countries do not have the right cultural responses around contagious diseases.
That really sucks because I was reading an article about 2 months ago about how much progress Africa has made in the last 20 years. And it was basically one of the summaries of this study was that in the last 20 years, the average life expectancy of a person in Africa has increased by 10 years.
Huh. Well, that's really great.
Because things have gotten so much better so fast. Basically, they with the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, a lot of the communist puppet states that were there had finally toppled by the early 2000s. And so the free market came in and worked its magic and life got better and people started living longer. And so, yeah, it would suck if I agree though, if we have to say who's going to get hit the hardest, it will be Africa. So that does stink.
Also, not treating Africa as one country, but a lot of the countries have similar problems around this. But also, there's a bunch of countries like Bangladesh and India where I worry, but we'll see what they do. They probably have more authoritarian governments, so they may still have a really strong crackdown. But there's a lot of people in India where I know India is like, it's hard to even count these people, and they have trouble figuring out how to allow them to vote in an election because they're so rural. And then it's like, are all these people gonna all lick each other's hands like we do in the US and then all get it? And then there's gonna be zero ventilators there. I feel like what's gonna happen is the true death toll of this is gonna have an error bar on it that's like millions of people wide. It's going to be like, oh, it killed between 5 and 7 million people in the year 2020. Nobody knows. The error bar is like huger than most of the disasters that have ever happened. I was thinking of other secondary effects this will have. I think that we could still see buying and hoarding panics, like we saw with toilet paper and like hand sanitizer. I think at any point people could be like, it's hard to get food, and then buy up all the food from supermarkets and then just keep buying up all the inventory as it shows up. And because like supermarkets don't have enough food to stock everyone's basement for 1 to 2 months. And so if people decide that they need to have 1 to 2 months suddenly, and they all decide it kind of at the same time, then they're just going to empty out all the supermarkets and they'll keep them empty. And then it's a nice self-fulfilling prophecy there where then it will be hard to get food. And then all the preppers will be like, I was right.
I'm still unable to take control of society, but I was right. I'm still just as socially awkward as ever.
Society never wanted your control, man. And politicians still do really well, even in the prepocalypse.
Nice. I have never heard that term. That's great.
Just made it up. Yeah, that's the end game, right? You're a prepper and you hope for the prepocalypse where everything favors you and you win. And they take all of the pop tabs off of soda cans and make a crown out of them for you to wear because you're the king of all the preppers. You're voted most prepared.
Also, you get all the mating opportunities.
Just all of them. Because obviously you have the most prepared genes and we should reward that. I think also governments will use this as an opportunity to try and make some power grabs and then never let go of that power. Really obvious one is, we need to be able to track people's locations in case of pandemics. And incidentally, we're just going to track everyone's location all the time with no warrants or oversight. And we're going to do it forever. I think a lot of governments are going to aim for that one. Because also that's such a sweet thing to have if you're in power. If you can track everybody, think of all the like dissent you could suppress. So I expect that we'll see that. I think another secondary effect is we'll see a big loss of trust in institutions. So like something I keep seeing is like there's some hospital administrator in New York City who's like, oh, we're doing fine. We definitely have enough ventilators. Like this isn't, we're all right. And then there's some people like from his hospital who are like, no, we don't have enough and it's going to get worse and it's going to be really bad. And I keep seeing politicians and leaders and people like that downplay this. Like, oh, it's not going to be that bad. We're prepared. And then it's going to be really bad. And so I expect something that people will be saying a lot, like in the next 10 years or so is, yeah, I mean, they're saying that, but that's what they said about COVID. And it'll be like, you can't trust people whenever they say like, remain calm, because they'll have said to remain calm during the most panic inducing thing that's happened in modern history. Like I said, if there's any time to panic, now is the time to panic. And they're like, please remain calm. And it's like, no, this is really bad. And they're like, we're fine, but we're not fine. There's no fineness here. So I think that we'll see that loss of trust. Oh, also, we had senators who sold their stock after learning about how bad things are probably going to be. And I think some people are going to be like, And it's not like a senator's under an obligation to be selfless. I think a lot of people misinterpret it. And they're like, oh, they're supposed to serve the community or something. And it's like, no, they're really supposed to be selfish. And then the Constitution and all the other people in the government are supposed to provide the checks on their power. It's assumed that everyone in the government's going to act pretty selfishly, but the goal is to build a mechanism that doesn't screw over the people too much compared to everything that came before. And so it's not like it's their job, but I think for some people it will be a bit of an awakening where they maybe didn't realize how selfish they could be. Also, if a lot of people die, it's going to make real estate cheaper.
Yeah, it's funny because that's the one I've been hearing for like 6 weeks now in like jokes and everything. It's like,
going to go buy all the condos in Florida.
Yeah. I was reading an article written by a guy a couple weeks back, and he was like, he said he was driving it through Florida somewhere, I forget, and he said he drove through this town, just a small random retirement town in Florida, and everybody, all the elderly people there are just out walking around and eating outside at the cafes and stuff, and just going about like nothing's happening. And it's like, this is going to be a buzzsaw through those communities when it gets there. And he said that later he went and looked up on the census website, and the median age in that town of residents was 71 years old. And yeah, in places like that, it's just going to destroy the population. And, a side effect of that will be that real estate will get cheaper. I mean, real estate is going to tend to be owned by older people, and older people are going to be disproportionately killed by this. So,
Another thing that's kind of sad about that. So the median age is 71. So we pretend like everyone's like, around 71. That means their parents sometimes and their grandparents pretty much always would be old enough to remember the 1918 flu. Like their grandparents would have all lived through it, right?
yeah, I don't.
That happened 102 years ago. So if they're 71 years old, that means it happened 31 years before they were born.
Yeah. Okay. So their deceased parents would have lived through it. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like you and I know about stuff that happened like from World War II, whereas some kids born now are like, what's this Holocaust thing? They never taught us in school or something like that. Like the memory of it is kind of fading. And so I feel like their grandparents would have been like, yeah, there was this really bad illness that spread everywhere and it was really bad. And these people would be like, yeah, I remember hearing about that, but I don't care. I guess I'm going to exercise my God-given right to lick my neighbor's hands. But yeah, it's gonna be really bad for them. The thing is, if a bunch of people in a median 71-year-old community die, freeing up their properties, I think more 71-year-olds from elsewhere will just move in. So I don't know. It's not like it's a good investment opportunity there to take advantage of, I suppose.
I don't know. I don't want to sound too callous and macabre about it, but if you start
That's what people come to this podcast
I know
for.
we're a couple of sociopath engineers, but okay. And I know that if most of our listeners are engineers too, they're probably somewhere pretty far over on the sociopath scale with us. But so we'll just go ahead and discuss it.
Now is a good time for your serial killing.
Make your neighbors lick your hands. No one will ever suspect. But really, if we have a situation where, what's the death rate of 70 and older? It's like 12 or 15% or something. Yeah. Okay. So if you clear the deck of 15% of those people and you assume the vast majority of them are property owners because of their age, then you are going to free up a lot of property, a lot of real estate at the same time that you're having this economic downturn as a result. And so I bet there will be some amazing deals on nice, like 3-2 houses in Florida that are a mile or two from the beach.
That's true. Also, I think the death rate's 15% if you get medical care when you're critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're in, Florida in a very old community and then your local healthcare system gets overwhelmed, I don't know what the death rate is then. It's probably far higher.
Yeah.
Oh, and then I thought of industries that would be hit really hard, although I think we're already all seeing that. But I was like, oh no, what's going to happen to like Airbnb? Is that company going to survive this? I don't know how much cash they have on hand. And hospitality in general.
Yeah, I was talking with my wife the other night about Airbnb because we had talked about going on vacation with you guys in September. And so like we always just get an Airbnb when we go. And we were discussing that the big risk is the people who speculatively buy homes to put on Airbnb and now they could be foreclosed. And so you have a risk for that. If you go ahead and reserve an Airbnb for September and you're like, "Huh, I think by September either we'll all be dead or it'll be better." Either the flu bros will have won or the doomers would have been proved right. And so, you know, you add that risk in earlier on, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago. I was talking with some coworkers about this, and maybe I'm misremembering exactly how many weeks ago it was, but the cruise line stocks had already taken a giant dive, over 50%. And so I had told them, don't buy cruise line stocks. Like, if you want exposure to the risk that cruise lines are in right now with a potentially good payoff, go and reserve a cruise for like September or October. And either the cruise line's going to be bankrupt and you will have lost your deposit, or you'll get a really great cruise at a cheap price.
Did the prices dip correspondingly though?
Yeah, they did a lot.
Oh, okay.
I actually talked to a coworker whose wife is a travel agent, and he said that the cruise line companies had sweetened the deals for travel agents to get bookings, and even to simply move current existing bookings. Like typically, when a travel agent would reserve someone for a cruise and then they wanted to change the booking, there was no additional commission for the agent. But basically, the cruise lines had changed that now and said, we will give you the entire commission again,
Gosh.
just as long as you keep them on reserved for a cruise.
Wow, that's quite a deal. Yeah. So then, like, restaurants are going to be hit pretty hard. Air travel, obviously. I don't even know what's going to happen there. Like, I watched a nice video on YouTube the other day, and they were like, this is hitting them harder than 9/11, which was pretty bad. Although 9/11 was like, people not flying after 9/11 was a completely unfounded fear. Because it's like, why would you expect a second terrorist attack to happen later? Especially when it was like 4 simultaneous events. And so it was like, do you think there's like a second wave of them? Like, that doesn't really make sense. If there were 4 more groups that could do the attack, they would have just done 8 at the same time. And so that was kind of silly. But
Yeah, the airline industry sucks anyway and is always going bankrupt.
it sucks. You heard it here. Craig says it sucks.
Well, yeah, they have insane fixed costs. They're very vulnerable to cyclical events like the ability to travel, the ability to have extra income to go on vacation, the cost of fuel, labor issues. I mean, they have really strong unions that hurt them. So, the entire airline industry is just this very, very difficult industry to make work. And the result of that is the companies go bankrupt just regularly. So yeah, the airline industry is going to get hosed, but man, you shouldn't have been investing in airlines anyway.
I don't know. What if you're at the end of the longest bull market in history and all you know is stocks going up? You could be like, I mean,
Yeah. You're 38 years old and you've never seen a stock go down.
they're airlines where they go up. That's what they do. They never land. Yeah. Tourism will be hurt really bad, especially like regions that completely depend on it, like Las Vegas or, island nations that do a lot of tourism. In some cases, you're actually banned from the tourism. And then in other cases, people just won't want to do it. And so that's going to hurt a lot. And probably places that are really tourism heavy don't have a whole bunch of like savings prepared to be able to weather an event like this. And then also theme parks, movie theaters, stuff where it's just sort of predicated on, hey, let's jam a bunch of people right next to each other. Like anywhere where there's like 100 chairs all right next to each other in some building, like a movie theater.
Yeah. I could see movie theaters never coming back from this.
Yeah, because also I think they're a shitty experience. I hate going to the movies. I haven't gone in many years. I really hate it.
Yeah. So if you've listened to the Functioneering podcast, all 150 plus episodes, you know that Craig does not make dire apocalyptic predictions. I always hedge everything. But I think that movie theaters are really in a serious spot where they might not ever recover because we already have streaming. We already have situations where Netflix has released a movie into a theater at the same time that they release it on Netflix. And so it's not unheard of that, or not unthinkable, that you could have studios just decide, well, screw theaters, they're not worth the money anymore. We'll just release it on the streaming services exclusively for everything.
Yeah, I guess what that would look like is a bunch of locations close and then they just never reopen. And then later after the like downturn is over, a few more locations open, but it never, like 2020 or 2019 is the peak of movie theater locations for all of history. And it never gets to the 2019 high ever again.
But I agree, I hate going to the movie theater also. I just feel like the place is so filthy. And I'm not a particular germaphobe or like OCD about hand washing or anything, but man, I just go to theater and I'm just like, this is the nastiest place I will visit.
I have never really cared about that. The thing that always really bothers me is that you have to watch the movie on their schedule. They say the showtime is 2 or whatever, and then you get there and you're subjected to 15 minutes of ads. And you have to get there early to get a seat because you want to sit with other people, and everyone does the let's space one seat, like courtesy seat thing. So you have to get there early to wait for the ads before the movie. which you then cannot pause. And so you have to manage like your bathroom visits really carefully to not miss any of it. And then it's over, and then everyone leaves at the same time. And then you walk outside and you're like, oh, it's blindingly bright. And I just don't like I don't like how much of my time it wastes. And then how relatively expensive it is to do. Like tickets are getting close to like $20. And it's like, what am I paying for here exactly?
And then most of the movies suck.
Yeah. So I think that's probably just a combination of getting older and having seen more movies. But now I see a movie and I can just really rapidly pattern match it. And I'm like, oh, this is like The Matrix or whatever. And so I don't get as much out of seeing a movie now. And so, yeah, just the whole experience is really soured for me. And it's probably not like that for everybody, but man, this is sure going to hurt movie theaters. So then who wins from this? Obviously, video conferencing, remote work solutions. Zoom stock is doing really well. It's zooming right up. Atlassian is doing well.
I really hope that this is like the beginning of work from home for more and more people. Probably the number of people working from home is 1,000 times or 100 times higher than it was 2 months ago. And a lot of companies are going to look at this long term. When this gets done, they're going to look around and they're going to say, why do we have all this office space we pay rent for? We can get rid of 2/3 of it. We have all these people who only want to come into the office 1 day a week anyway. Let's let them.
Yeah, but one of the classic things that was holding work from home back, like I've worked in tech for a long time. And so for the most part, we've always been able to work from home because like we had the tech to be able to do it. But the problem is you have this divide where you have the work from work people and they all run into each other at the water cooler and the micro kitchen or whatever. They have serendipitous conversations. They talk like they end the video conference meeting and then they talk on the way out of the meeting room, and that's where some of the important decisions get made. And they like spin their chair around and ask each other a question at their desk, and like you lose all of that. And so the work from home people are always second class citizens, and if they're persistently work from home, they find it really difficult to get promoted and to be seen as leaders and things like that because they're obviously excluded from a lot of conversations. And so after this ends, some companies are going to return to like work from work, and you're going to have that sort of class divide. And I don't think anyone's come up with a solution to that. Like once in a while, someone pretends they're like, oh, let's have like a Zoom call that never ends. And then it's like, oh, everyone can just serendipitously walk in front of this monitor. You put the monitor on your desk and then it's like the person's working with you. But those are lame. That never really works. It's not really a good substitute. And like, I can definitely say that. Like, I would go use the bathroom and then get a Mountain Dew to prepare for having to use the bathroom again in an hour. And I would just keep doing this loop. And there were so many people that I would talk to when I went in the micro kitchen. I'd be like, hey, what are you working on? And then we would talk about it. And it was like really valuable information exchange. And I definitely wouldn't get that walking to my fridge to get a Mountain Dew. Like, I'm not going to walk past the always on monitor and then talk to somebody else who's getting a soda. I don't really know where that's going to go. I predict an increase in work from home, but nothing like some people are like, oh, it's just going to switch to like entirely work from home. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be like 5% or something very tiny.
I feel like it's going to be on the order of like 50 or 60% of the people who are working home today will continue to work from home.
All right. So if we're doing a prediction market, I'm buying shares of your stupid prediction.
I'll sell them to you, idiot.
I think you're way off with 50 to 60%. Way off.
Disagreement is what makes a market.
It is, yeah. But if working from work was good enough for my grandpappy, it's going to be good enough for you. I just think people are going to keep going to work. But we'll see. Anyone who's figured out how to like price gouge during this time, they're getting a lot out of it. It's somewhat difficult. I guess I don't know. You must know about like various like prepper type things. Although prepping's kind of different from like trying to gouge, right? That's like surge price or surge demand or whatever. You need to have a bunch of supplies available right now to sell. And with preppers, there's just like this low level of people buying it all the time, I guess. Although I know sales surge whenever there's a problem, right?
I guess I see what you're saying. Like, the people who are preppers are like buying stuff all the time to always be more and more prepared. Where like the people who stampede once they're like, hey, you can't go to Costco anymore, they're suddenly going to buy anything they can get their hands on.
Yeah. So if you're like Joe's emergency toilet paper shack and one of the things you do is you just buy toilet paper stock from anybody, no matter how expensive it is. And then you just raise your prices in response to demand. Like you'd be doing really well. But also the other thing you'd see if you were Joe's Toilet Paper Shack is like Amazon won't let you sell. Google won't let you advertise. Like Facebook won't let you advertise because everyone just fucking hates price gouging, partly because there's that term. Like I think it's a really nice like marketing judo thing that Uber performed where they called it surge pricing and they got everyone to refer to it as surge pricing instead of like temporary gouging or whatever. And they'd be like, the surge, it's 2x right now. But in general, I see it referred to as gouging everywhere in the news. It's like all the toilet paper's gone and now you can't get it. And then somebody's like, hey, I'm selling it for twice the price. And everyone's like, we hate that idea so much. We'd rather just walk around with poop in our butt than have anybody be able to get it at any price. And I love how that's people's response to price gouging. Like, if I can't have it, then no one will. But that seems to be how people are. And so it's very difficult for gougers to sell into that market.
It seems like it's difficult to like set up an investment though where you would make money by becoming the gouger later on.
Well, you could. I've been thinking about this. I feel like what you could do is you could run like Joe's, emergency supply website or something, and you work hard during times of peace, lack of crisis, to build up a reputation for we're the go-to place when it's hard to get stuff. And then when a disaster occurs, you tell your suppliers like, I'll buy it at any price, and I will either give you rev share or I'll just buy it at elevated prices. And then you just go try to sell it. And then, as a lot of people might recognize, that means you take on a lot of risk. Yeah, no shit. Because people who are running a business like that are still running a business. And a lot of people just think, oh, price gouging, it just makes magic infinite money. And that's why it's so terrible, because it's exploiting the market. And it's like, no, these people take on a whole bunch of risk to try and make a profit. And there's definitely a trade-off there. That's why everyone doesn't try to do it. But somebody who's specialized in this would probably be able to do a good job of figuring out the right amount of risk to take on, like how much inventory they could buy, how much they could probably move. And if they're running a site, and this assumes shipping keeps working, then they would be able to, after one or two disasters, they'd probably get known for this. And it'd be like, hey, it's hard to come by MREs or something like that. And it's like, well, you can go to this place and it might go up to $50 an MRE, but you can definitely get one from them. Like if anybody can get it to you. Or, a hurricane happens and it's like they'll ship it to you by having Joe drive out to your hurricaned place in his truck. Like he'll drive to Louisiana and then he'll take a boat the rest of the way and he'll hand you the MRE and he'll be like, this is $2,500, but here's your MRE. And then you'll be like, hey, can I get a ride back on the boat? And he's like, no, I just do delivery. But like, you could set this up.
The ride back will be $5,000. Pay up, sucker. I only accept gold bars.
Yeah. Also, when stuff like that happens, people get really irrationally mad about it. Like, oh, I had to get a life flight helicopter out of here because this disaster happened. It cost me $5,000. And it's like, some dudes had to keep a helicopter around. I mean, a helicopter, not just...
And keep pilots and maintainers on the payroll.
Yeah, it's like, do you think it's just free to have helicopters standing around waiting to pick you up after you broke your arm or something? And they're like, well, the government should do it. And it's like, oh, okay. So what you advocate for is someone should take money from everybody else to pay for your, life flight. And it's like, whatever. It's sort of like, it makes me almost irrationally angry in the opposite way that it makes most people irrational. Because like, I understand the market forces that are at work here. And I'm like, why is everyone trying to stop everyone from doing like the right helpful thing? Like during a disaster, it's way better for people to be able to get overpriced supplies than nothing. But everyone's like, no, once they get to a certain price, then it becomes wrong. And I would rather see people die than get overpriced supplies. And people shift to that way of thinking. And you're like, what's the right number of people to die? And then they're like mad at you for asking the question. But
yeah. When grandma needs the oxygen machine to keep running or she dies, and you don't have a generator, but suddenly you have no power coming through the power line to your house, you're either going to buy the generator at $5,000 because the gouger provided it to you at that price, or the good people stop the gouger from providing generators to anyone at any price and your grandma dies.
But somehow that's a better outcome.
I feel like it's more impactful to show people like there really are people who die in these situations because these price gougers aren't allowed to come in and say, hey, the last person who's desperate, who is in the life or death situation, they can get it. And it'll be $5,000, but they can get it. There's still one available. Because if that dude with the truckload of generators who shows up in Florida after the hurricane sells them all for cost plus the gas to get there, he'll sell them all immediately. And then your grandma doesn't get one to run her oxygen machine.
Yeah. But also, one of the things that probably influences this is a lot of times once something gets really overpriced to be able to do this thing, I think it gets pushed out of the reach of someone on a journalist's salary to be able to buy. And so when people are deciding whether to report on this issue and whether it's right or wrong, they say, well, I would never be a beneficiary of this because it'd be too expensive for me on my journalist salary. And so then they're like, I think it's probably wrong.
It's wrong for everyone all the time.
Yeah, because it would only benefit people richer than me. And we all know that they're evil because, like, obviously I'm making about the right amount of money that a good person can make. And anyone who's making more than that must be exploiting people. So, like, you know, they're just exploiting people more. And it must be bad. And that probably motivates some of the thinking around it. Yeah, so let's see. Oh, preppers will win. That's in my list. They'll be like, yay.
Really?
They won't necessarily win, but I think they'll just be like, well, I'm really comfortable.
They'll feel happy. Yeah, they'll feel happy, but I don't...
Like, this is a good outcome from all your prepping. Like, it finally helped, right? If you bought a whole bunch of cans of, is it Mountain House? Is that the brand?
I don't know. I feel like they don't win. I feel like, yeah, they're more comfortable during the situation, but how many people are going to starve to death because of COVID in America? None. Exactly none will.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Close to none.
And so it's like, okay, so you saved a lot of inconvenience. I guess you could argue, in their defense, they have to put themselves at less risk in acquiring food over the next several months, right? Because I have to drive to Kroger and, like, a guy has to hand me my receipt through my car window and then he loads my car for me while I stay in the driver's seat. And so, like, I have the risk of that interaction with that guy. And, like, literally outside of my wife and kids, that's the only person I've interacted with in, like, the last 6 days or 7 days or something. I don't even remember now. But, you know, and so, like, if you're a prepper and you have, like, you know, a bunker full of supplies, then you do not even have to take on that risk. So I guess in that way, they do actually, like, win something. Because there's probably at least one who will live who would have otherwise died because the Kroger click pickup guy, like, handed him a receipt with COVID all over it.
Yeah, so it's a tiny win.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. It is a tiny, tiny measurable win. But I don't think it's a win like, you know, Amazon is...
9mm bullets will become currency.
Yeah, I don't think it's a win in the sense that, like, anyone who was shorting airlines has won.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of it as, like, to some extent, they'll be like, finally, the prepping paid off. Because it mostly hasn't, right? Like, if you were prepping and then you went through the 2008 crisis, it was not a crisis that affected food and shelter and all that. But this one, finally, you know, like you said, you could expose yourself to a little less risk. Also, what if you're a prepper and you're like 80? Because they don't have to be as old as us. They could be a lot older.
Right. Then that one interaction with the person at Kroger is very risky. It's much riskier than it is for me in my 30s.
Yeah. And so you'd be like, hey, it finally paid off some. It might even justify the money that you've spent on it. Because sometimes people do a thing that's kind of expensive, you know? Like, some people just buy a lot of food in advance and have it stored somewhere, and then they eat through that food. And so essentially prepping isn't really costing them much money at all. Like, they just have a little bit of capital outlay sitting there in inventory. But some people, like, have a second home that's like their mountain house or whatever. And they'll never see a return on that unless it protects them in some way. But maybe now it has. And so some of them are like, yay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can buy that.
And then this will benefit tech workers who can remote work. Although not as much as you seem to think it will. But I think it'll benefit them a little bit. So let's see. I've made some notes. I think people will gain some awareness of some stuff that I feel like culturally people are not really aware of. There's a lot more awareness of you don't know stuff if you're not measuring it. And I think a lot more people are becoming aware of stuff like, well, that's because that country started testing, or, oh, that's because that country got more tests available, or, oh, that country's not really testing. And they're starting to realize that, like, a government reported statistic is sort of like only as good as how well that government can measure it. And also, as sort of a corollary to that, I think more people are becoming aware that some governments just lie about their statistics. I think increasingly people are becoming distrustful of Chinese statistics for that reason, because I think China probably does lie about a lot of them.
Do you think they're lying any more than they historically have? Or that people are just like all of a sudden more distrustful because lots of people are getting sick and dying as a result?
I'm just imagining China publishing a graph of how much they've lied about statistics in the past. And they're like, as you can see, it's going down. And you're like, wait a second. But I think they're probably lying about the same amount. The other thing is, I think what it is it's like at every level, an official is pushed towards reporting a more positive number. And then that sort of aggregates up. And so it can be stuff like a lot of little lies averaged together. And people do stuff like, oh, it's 45, let's round it to 50. And then it's like, how much of a lie is that? Maybe it's not a huge one. And so I think it's one of those things where like saying they lie about statistics is sort of like, even that is not really accurate. It's like they fudge their statistics a little bit. And you can imagine China itself not even being completely culturally aware of how much fudging must be going on. It would be really hard to compute.
Yeah. And when you say they just lie about their statistics, that invokes this imagined thought of this room full of Chinese statisticians sitting around like trying to debate over how much they can lie and have people still believe them.
Yeah, and it's not like that.
Yeah, in reality, it's probably like you said, it's one guy at a time. I worked for a company earlier in my career, and basically I would observe the exact same thing where like I would see what was happening on a program, and then I would see it initially from the ground level of the engineers working on the program. And then I would read what the CEO of the company reported about the program. And it was just opposite. It wasn't even like it wasn't just like slightly different or exaggerated or anything. It was the exact fucking opposite. And so it was like, and that's what I thought at the time too. I thought, every step as this gets reported up towards the CEO, it changes a little bit. And so something that begins in the trenches with the engineer as, oh my God, please stop doing that to us. By the time the CEO hears it, it's, we love it and we want more.
Yeah, and it's like the shuttle program, how we talked about normalization of risk. And also, so then there, do you say the CEO is lying about it? Like that's wildly inaccurate, right?
Yeah, he doesn't even know. He's not aware. And so he can't make a good decision about how to proceed because this information he's getting is so bad.
But then I feel like the culture in the US is just like, we just pass around these Excel sheets and they just have these numbers on them and we just add them together. And then you get to the end and you're like, oh my God, the murder rate doubled. And everyone's like, oh, well, that sucks. Like, it's just like, but that's what happened. And there's not as much pressure. And then it's like, okay, well, now what do we do about that? But I feel like there's a little bit less pressure to fudge those numbers. I'm sure there is some, but I feel like there's more pressure to just accurately report the numbers. Oh, I think people will be more aware of exponential growth because like you could just read the news and you're like, this news is 2 weeks old and therefore out of date. And that really sends this strong signal of what exponential growth on a short time scale looks like and how strong that is. It's ridiculous. And you see like, oh, there's one case in this country and then there's a bunch and then there's a million billion cases and the spread looks ridiculous. And I think a lot of people are like, wow, that's really strong in a way that I never saw in my 1% interest savings account before because the time scale was too long. I think people also get more awareness of personal hygiene. I think a lot of people were like, and didn't really take it that seriously. I know a lot of people are now aware of how much they touch their face all day, and they were never aware before.
Oh man, I love touching my face. God, I love touching
my fingers are in my eyes right now. But that's interesting. I think some of that won't really go away. And then eventually there'll be like this younger generation who didn't live through COVID and everyone will look at them touching their eyes and their nose and be like,
yeah.
And then later we can tell our grandkids about this great plague. And then when they're 70 and living in Florida, they can forget all about it.
Yeah.
So for predictions, I think China is still lying about their official numbers. I think they're way off because they're sort of like, oh, we've stopped all the infections.
Yeah, and we've gone multiple days with no new infections.
I don't think that's true, but we'll see what happens.
They've claimed that they had consecutive days with no new reported infections.
And it's certainly possible, but I would be very surprised. As we already talked about, I think Africa is just going to get smashed by this. I think the entire world will never know the true extent of how badly Africa was hit, and they will have to infer it through statistics, which is also kind of in its own way really bad. It's like, we don't know how big that asteroid was, but we can infer from this crater that it must have been pretty big. It's going to be like that level of damage. I think the US is actually going to fare really badly, and we're already well on our way, but I think the US will end up being a pretty hard hit country. Maybe we'll be able to, we as a country will, not that I'm doing it, will save more people in the healthcare system than some countries were able to. But I think our infection rate is still, it's going to be stupidly high, considering in theory we're a first world country that should be on top of stuff. But from a standpoint of the leadership is not on top of it or aware. I've read only a single article about this, but I think Japan is probably going to be hit really hard. I think Japan has some cultural problems that lead them to have a blind spot around this.
Also, their population inversion.
Yes, but I think they're under testing. I think they're under reporting. They're still not really taking it seriously. Like, people are still packing onto subways in Japan. If they keep doing that, they're going to see like, a 50% plus infection rate, and it's going to kill a ton of people. At some point, they'll probably do some kind of lockdown. And I do trust in Japan to act very authoritarian, and they could do some kind of crazy lockdown. Like, you're not allowed to leave your house. And that would go a long way. And
yeah, and the people would follow it.
Yeah. And the thing that's nice about a lockdown is, let's say you lock down for 30 days. At the moment you do it, regardless of how bad things are, the infections will absolutely stop. Everyone will transmit it to people in their own home, and then it will die there. And that will be the end of it. And so if you lock down for like 30 days, even if you're at 50% infected rate, you will stop it in its tracks right then if you go completely hard on that. So Japan could. And so at any moment, they could probably flip the switch and just fix it. But it remains to be seen if they will. I think Trump will try to shed blame for this as fast as possible. I mean, he's already done a pretty good job. He made Pence in charge of coronavirus for some reason. I don't know why. That seemed like an early attempt to shed blame for anything bad that happened. He's said, I don't take responsibility for this. I don't know how well that'll work. And he'll try and be like, oh, I was going to do all these great and fantastic things around it, but the legislature stopped me or something. I don't know. He's not really fighting against a personified enemy. So I guess he'll have to blame other people that he's working with, but I think he'll try to shed blame for it really hard. And the main reason I say that is because then I think Biden, in trying to defeat him in the election, is going to try and make the blame stick to him. And so it'll be this interesting battle of, well, you're literally in charge of the country, but somehow the deaths weren't your fault. But Trump can say things louder than basically anyone in the world can say them. Like, he can as I like to talk to one coworker, I was like, this guy can just like type a single message on his phone and ruin your day. Because he hated Trump so much. I was like, I can't believe you give him that level of power over your life. I don't read what he says, but
why would a person who hates Trump be reading his Twitter feed? Why put yourself through that if you don't like him? That's weird.
That's the main thing that people try to get out of the news, is they try to, what happens when people read the news every day? They get really angry. And then what do they do the next day? They read the news. Why do they do that to themselves?
That's not why I read the news.
Well, okay, first off, no one says they read the news to get angry. But secondly, that is what happens with a lot of people. They're like, look at this unfair thing that happened. This person was on trial for murder, and then they got off on probation because they're rich or something. And then people are like, now I'm mad. And then this politician wants to take money and redirect it from thing I like to thing I don't like. And then people are like, that's terrible. And then they go read the news the next day. And it's like, do you think it's going to be better?
Yeah, I guess that's what most people do. That just seems weird because, like, I don't read the news to get mad. I read the news to try to, like, learn what's going on so I can figure out if there's any investment angle.
Yeah, and that's a good reason to do it. But I think it's a combination of a couple of factors. So, like, first off, news pretends to be, like, informative. And people pretend to get informed by it. let's, let's say that. If you disagree with me, I think you are wrong. But in theory, that's kind of what's going on. It's this game that people play. But really what's happening is news is just entertainment. It's just like gossip, except sometimes it's gossip about the president of the US, or it's gossip about the economy or something like that. But really, a big purpose of it is to tell you something that you can then go use to gain social status with other people. So you go talk to your friend group and you're like, did you hear about the thing? And you're like, yeah, I heard about that thing and I have complex thoughts about it. And they're like, yeah, you're a guy who can have complex thoughts. And they're like, I am. And they're like, yeah, let's be a little bit more loyal to each other in the future. And like, that's really the transaction that's taking place, but no one would want to admit that to themselves. And so the news needs to be entertaining and engaging. And one of the best ways to be engaging is to infuriate people with examples of unfairness. Unfairness is like attractive to read about in this way that almost nothing else is. The other one is threats. And like, there's always the joke about, could this simple thing kill your children? Like more at 11 or whatever. And why is that the joke? And it's because it's this threat. And people are very interested in transmitting threats and hearing about threats. So news is filled with injustice and threats. A lot of article, like you could read the headline and a lot of them boil down to just that. It's like, is it an injustice or a threat, or is it maybe both? Like it threatens injustice at you. And then people keep reading the news, but it's like addictive for people to do that because that's really engaging. Trump, to people who hate Trump, represents both. He's threats. This person was a foreign citizen. And Trump, in some ways, very directly threatens the way of life of foreign citizens. You never know when he's going to like ban them from leaving the country or entering the country, or maybe he'll revoke all their passports, or who knows? Because like, man, he hates foreigners for some reason. And you never know when he'll do something unfair. Like, hey, let's take a bunch of foreigners and like just, kind of imprison them for a really long time. And the conditions will be terrible. And like now they're all going to get COVID, right? It's kind of like a threat and an injustice combined. And like Trump's totally doing that. He's totally responsible for that. He could just be like, don't do it. But he thinks it's really important. And people who support him are like, I think it's important for some reason. And so I don't know. I'm not really weighing in on whether it's important. So yeah, that's why that guy did that. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see this battle of Trump being like, somehow these things that I was in control of aren't my fault. And then Biden's going to try and be like, hey, everyone, all this stuff is Trump's fault, but it's also clearly not, because like it's a virus. It does do its own thing. Like Trump didn't go kill all these people, but in some ways he would be responsible for like not preventing their deaths. And so Biden will be, I think, kind of working uphill because it's sort of abstract what the problems are. And it'll be easy for Trump to just be like, it wasn't my fault. But it is going to be really bad. Thousands of people will die. And so that'll sure look bad. And so it'll be interesting to see how that works. And the prediction markets seem to be reflecting that this is hurting Trump. Also, it'll be hard for Trump to say the economy is really great, because it's not. He has focused a lot on talking about how great the economy was, and it was doing really well. And I think probably Trump being in office was something that did support the economy, as you've talked about. If you're running a business and you care about the way the government interacts with your business, Trump made it less likely that problems would happen to your business in a lot of ways. And so that was really good. But now not all of that, a lot of that has been negated.
Hey, I just looked at Predictit, and Predictit's got Donald Trump at 51 cents and Joe Biden at 39 cents tonight.
Yeah, go to like a more than 1 month view, like 3 months or something. I think Trump has declined and Biden has increased. That was the main thing I was looking at.
90 days ago, Biden was at 21 cents, but that's because Bernie was probably way up. And 90 days ago, Trump was at 46 cents.
Ooh.
So he's at 51 tonight.
Am I just wrong then? He's gone up? Okay.
A couple of days ago, you were right. So, 10 days ago, he was at 45 cents, and today he's at 51. So he has had a rise in the last 10 days.
I still think he's going to get reelected, but I think it'll be harder. That's all. Being incumbent is such a strong advantage.
What's been really interesting to me, because I still have money bet on this market.
Oh.
So that's why I had the tab open and I was able to actually check it. What's been really interesting to me, clicking this tab like every 2 or 3 days, is the guys down at the bottom who mill around. Because like tonight, Bernie Sanders is at 4 cents, but Andrew Cuomo is at 5 cents. Because apparently he's been giving like really impressive press conferences every day on COVID in New York. Last week, or maybe the week before, when Trump's number was down somewhere in the 40s, Mike Pence came out of nowhere to like 6 cents. And so it was like people were factoring the odds of Trump getting COVID and maybe dying, and then the odds of all these other things happening, like maybe Trump steps down, or maybe Trump doesn't seek reelection if he thinks he's too weak of a candidate because of COVID, or, I could imagine all these different reasons. But basically, like, Mike Pence has gone from a steady 1 cent up to like 6 cents or something. And tonight he's down to 3 cents. But, people were kind of like hedging their Trump bet with Mike Pence. And so that's been kind of interesting too. But it's neat to click this up tonight and see Andrew Cuomo is 5 cents. And it's like, who really thinks he's going to come up at this point and edge Joe Biden out for the Democratic nomination?
Yeah, it seems like a 5% chance is very high.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
You could just buy the no in that market. Although then you make like a nothing profit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the horizon's too far out.
Although if you've looked, like some of those like minority candidates, they fluctuate pretty fast, like day by day. So you could buy all the no at 95, and then maybe in a week it drops back down to like 1, and then you could sell it. And then it's okay. It's pretty fast return. So if it's volatile, it might be worth trading one. Oh, my last prediction. Some high-level politicians will die from corona. I think a huge number of politicians are going to get this because, man, they just can't stop licking each other's hands. They love it.
Christ, I'm surprised that hasn't started happening yet. I mean, Rand Paul is like the only one I've heard of who's gotten it, who's like, a representative or a senator or very high in the executive branch.
Well, also, I mean, in the rest of the world, too.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know.
Prince Charles got it.
Boris Johnson has it. Doesn't the president of Brazil have it?
But also having them get it isn't too significant because, like, they get the flu sometimes also. But some of them will die, and that will be pretty influential. I think also the first really high-level politician that dies is going to change the response that we see from other politicians.
You mean this could happen to me?
Yeah, I think it's going to change it marginally. By marginally, I don't mean a small amount, but I mean like, I don't know, like the economics term. It'll change the way they think about it by 5% or 10% or something like that. But in a way that a lot of other things wouldn't have changed it, except maybe having someone in their family die from it. Yeah, it would be like if a politician gets assassinated and then maybe another one gets assassinated, and then suddenly a lot of like world leaders would be like, okay, I think I need a little bit more security or something like that. Actually, it's really similar. They'll just get assassinated by a virus. But I think they'll be like, my personal security is much more at threat, and I can lock down my country and it will protect me. So we're kind of all waiting for like the president of some country to die. And then a lot of countries will be like, they'll go into lockdown 1 to 3 days later.
Yeah, I'm really surprised we haven't seen more of politicians in the US getting it yet.
Or even getting sick enough that they need to go into care.
Yeah.
Like, how has Trump avoided it? I really thought he would be sick already.
Me too.
For sure he was going to get it. Like, maybe he's an asymptomatic carrier.
Yeah, or maybe they just pump him full of antivirals every morning.
But I mean, he's like standing next to people who have it. He's shaking hands with everybody.
Yeah. They're all touching the podium one after another.
Yeah, giving their hands a nice licking afterwards to clean them off.
Yeah.
I'm honestly very shocked. If there had been a predicted market for this, I would have been like, yeah, like 90+% that he would have had it by now. So I'm surprised.
Yeah, the other thing is, if he gets it and he is not asymptomatic, he can't hide it. He has a schedule of appearances. It's not like he can just start canceling everything and not appear while he's sick.
We've talked about that before. I don't know. I don't know if you can hide it.
I don't think he can.
Let's say you have doctors. You have doctors who can prescribe you any drug. They can give you methamphetamine or whatever. If you take enough drugs to try and like counteract the symptoms, can you still appear in public and people won't realize that you have it? I don't know.
Man, that's a tricky balancing act.
I agree. Also, I bet the answer is no, but I'm just like posing the question of like, what if you take literally methamphetamine and other things like some antihistamines, someone suctions out your lungs right before you go talk? I don't know. You keep your appearances down to 15 minutes. Can you fake it? Can you get through those?
I bet it could be done, but I don't know if a 73-year-old man could do it.
What if he's already dead and we're in a Weekend at Bernie's situation?
Oh my God, what if? Plus, we're all in the Matrix. Plus, he was dead the whole time.
No, now you're just spoiling too many things.
I am surprised Trump hasn't gotten it.
Yeah, it's very shocking.
Yeah. Imagine if it gets into the Supreme Court. Because you got what's you got Ginsburg, who's had cancer like twice or three times or something, and is very frail to start with. And then you've got is it Bayer, I think, is the next oldest one, and then Clarence Thomas. Yeah. I think they're the three oldest ones.
Well, I would hope that Trump would appoint more people like Neil Gorsuch.
You done it now.
I'm willing to state a political opinion here, definitely.
You're gonna get flamed harder than I am.
That's fine with me. I feel like that it'll be an enduring legacy of Trump's presidency, and one that I'm really happy to see have happened. Because Gorsuch is like, he's an originalist in interpreting the Constitution, and he seems pretty libertarian. And it's every time I read one of his opinions, I guess either dissenting or whatever the other one is.
Concurring.
Oh, yeah. I was like, assenting? That's not right. Yeah. Every time I read one, I'm like, yeah, this is what I would have hoped I would have written if I were the justice. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And it's really great. And I don't know how many of him there are in the judge community. So maybe there's not that many people to just like pluck to a point, but I would hope for that. That would be amazing.
My choice for new justice would be Judge Dredd.
He is the law. Also, you don't really need the other 8, do you?
The sentence is death.
Sounds fair. You're the judge.
But we're arguing over chevron deference and administrative rulemaking. No, the sentence is death.
Yeah. He's never wrong. That's about all the predictions I have. Do you have anything I haven't covered?
No, I thought that was really good. I guess what we need to do is think about how we can make money off of these predictions.
Buy real estate in Florida.
Oh, man, if you've wanted to have real estate in Florida, I think you're going to find some great deals in the coming year.
But otherwise, I don't know. Short the Nikkei.
Yeah, okay. That's a good idea.
A lot of the movements already happened, though.
No, not...
Well, actually, I'm making a prediction there, right? And I could be wrong.
Yeah, your assertion is that things are going to get much worse still. And essentially, I think that's a minority prediction. And so the market has not priced that in. So there's still a lot of opportunity if you have enough conviction about that.
That's true. Well, I mean, in 5 days, they're going to be twice as bad.
Yeah.
Like, countries are not rolling out their mitigation efforts anywhere near fast enough. So depending on how long it takes this podcast to get edited and published, it's going to look... I don't know. I guess we could have said what actual numbers were, but we're going to be looking at this. Will sound like a rosy podcast in like a week because things will be worse.
Yeah.
We're going to get, that's one of the things you get with this. You can make predictions and you get a tight feedback loop on your predictions. Like in a month, we're going to be able to listen to this and then be like, here's where we were right and wrong. Like we'll know what happened with Japan in a month and in 2 or 3 months. Like all this stuff's going to be, it's pretty much going to be right or wrong for the most part, except things like Trump's reelection.
As of yesterday, March 28th, Saturday, there were 121,105 active cases in the US, and there had been 2,038 deaths so far.
Yep.
So in 5 days, we expect the number of deaths to have doubled. And actually, if you look back, 4 days before that, the deaths were 900. So they went from 900 to 2,038 in 4 days.